LBR LBO Infrastructure Summit 2015, making Colombo a globally competitive city.
Good morning, everybody. I'm not going to waste time with too many formalities. In the interest of time and getting on with the show, let's just jump right in. I think today is really about thinking through what we need to do with our cities. So in my view, I think the future of Sri Lanka and the urban trajectory we have already embarked on lies on one thing, really in our ability to unlock value in the urban real estate markets. I think we have to do that in a concerted effort, a systematic approach to developing our cities, to evolving our cities, is fundamental, and I think it is very much the need of the hour for Sri Lanka. Of course, I'm biased. I work at the UDA. So let's look at the bright side. We all know the bright side. Colombo is actually a fairly nice city. Yes, we're not in the top 100, as Lakshman says, on that ranking. But if you compare ourselves to the rest of the region, we're actually fairly nice. It's a clean city. We've got beautiful open spaces. We've got some nice buildings coming up. We've got more in the pipeline. It's quite clean. So there's lots of things we have going for it. It is congested, but it's not as congested as some cities. So I think there's a lot of positives, and you know, many visitors from the region particularly love Sri Lanka and they admire it. But if you look a little deeper and you peel the onion, so to speak, you see that we really have quite a few problems to solve. So let me just spend a little bit of time highlighting some of the things that at least I see as key. First, it's ribbon development and sprawl of the urban settlement in Sri Lanka. What you see on the right is just a distribution of population density, and you see that basically the Colombo development is really spreading somewhat like a cancer across the western province. The image on the left, you will see how that actually evolves. It evolves along roads. Every time you lay a new road, you have this urban sprawl that happens with it. And we have a situation where our development is just spreading across a very large geographic area in a poorly controlled way. And with it, we're taking environmental issues, traffic congestion gets worse, and so many kind of trickle issues come out. So the sprawl of the development makes it extremely difficult to service and manage. Increasing congestion, again, we all know about this. You take any major artery, we've got major congestion in Sri Lanka, and it's getting worse. We've got about 400,000 vehicles that hit the roads this year. As we get richer as a country, more people are buying cars, and we really need to get off this drug of private transport and move to a mass transit model. I think we'll spend a lot of time on that later today. Another interesting problem, which maybe people don't see as much, is the fact that the city is gentrifying. Basically, the poor and the middle class are moving out of the city, the middle class mostly, and the city is changing to be more of a playground of the rich, and the middle class are moving out. The slide on the right, you see blue areas, which is the heart of Colombo. This is where the population is actually dropping. And the brown areas is where population is growing. So you're seeing a displacement of urban population from the center to the fringe. And that's because they're basically getting priced out of the city. And that's a growing problem. If that actually accelerates, then we're going to have issues with the viability of the core. We're also going to have issues with how to deal with getting all these people in, because the majority of them actually work in the city. We talked yesterday about garbage. I think we have a reasonably good situation, at least in the western province, on collection, but the back end of it is not so pretty. We have a couple of large dump sites where we do not process waste, and we're running out of space to put this garbage. So I think it's very urgent that we deal with this problem before we go into a trajectory of more rapid growth, which will also result in more garbage. Haphazard land use, again, a big problem, in my opinion. These two slides of images, the dots represent industrial establishments in the western, in Colombo district and Gampaha district. It's really blatantly clear that we do not concentrate industries. And as a result, we cannot regulate the impact of industries. And you cannot provide the economies of scale and the conveniences that our industries really will require to thrive. So controlling land use and making it systematic and organizing the city, if you will, is very much required. Then anybody who's tried to get a building approved or a major project approved in Sri Lanka will realize it's a really nebulous process. Nobody quite has the formula of how to navigate the system, and that needs to get fixed. We need to find ways to actually get through this and be much more investor-friendly, investor-savvy, and have a clear process from concept to fruition of whatever the business or idea means to be. So we've got issues, but if we take a step back and imagine what really is possible, I think it's amazing. Because the problems we have are not that bad. We're still just beginning on this upward curve of urbanization. And we really can, I believe we can really turn this thing around. We really can build a city that is not parasitic, as Professor Willie Mendes was talking about yesterday, but really is the engine that drives growth, an engine that actually creates more economic opportunity, that spreads it throughout the region. A city that really is cosmopolitan, that is home to a diversity of people from around the world. A world-class facilities, a springboard, basically the beacon in the region. I think we can create this. And I think we can create this city that is not just a city for the rich and the affluent, but a city for everybody, a city where even the average, Bandara or whoever feels happy to live in, a city that's inclusive of the rich and the poor and everybody exists, and a city that actually is governed very well, that is fair, that is reasonable to all its citizens. The question is, how do we get there? I think it requires a lot of careful diligence and planning, a lot of structured, rigorous, kind of put your head down and think through issues kind of planning. And the discipline to not get distracted by the day-to-day riffraff and stay focused on the long term. It's also going to require a lot of patience because the solutions to some of these problems are very long-term in nature. We need to put the systems in place so we can realize a medium-term or long-term dream of what Colombo or what the Western Province or what Sri Lanka can be. And that might involve in the short term taking some difficult steps, some popular, maybe unpopular steps, just to make sure that we set the stage for a solid medium term. Of course, there's a couple of models people think of when they say, look, let's turn around a big metropolis. There's the very popular build it and they will come model that has failed in so many countries, and we ourselves have a very dramatic example of a failure down south. And we have a couple of examples of things that we've built that didn't really fly. So that model clearly doesn't work. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a hit, but more often than not, you get a miss. But a more rational approach is what we're trying to advocate. A rational approach that builds on the existing agglomeration of urban development. This image is from the World Bank. Sumila showed it yesterday. It shows the development patterns in the country and how it's evolving. It's very, very clear. And this has been our policy for some time now, but it's really nice to get this validated with this kind of data, that you basically have 4 or 5 major urban centers that we need to focus on. That's where most of the people live, that's where most of the activity is, and that's what we really need to turn around. And that rounds up to Western Province, Gaul to Mathura Corridor, Kandy, Trinco, Jaffna, and Batticaloa. If you can turn these cities around, if you focus on these and turn these around, I think you change the country. And I think that's what we need to do. So the urban transformation that we seek, I think requires maybe 5 things. I mean, there's lots of things, but if I could group it, into five distinct buckets. Integrated planning and integrated action. A transition to mass transit. Get off the private transport into mass transport. We need to make that happen. Transform the housing sector. Enable and truly embrace private capital and private investment. And strengthen governance. I think these are the five things we need to do. And let me just spend a little bit of time on each of these. So in terms of integrated planning, I think we'll talk a lot about it in this session as well. I think we need to take the time to look at the big picture, figure out what the problems are, and get planning done in a cohesive, collective, inclusive way. So that means not a bunch of government folks locking ourselves in a room and saying, look, this is how we do it, but really coming out to you and talking about what we're doing. Get your ideas, get your criticism, absorb them, work with the private sector, work with civil society, work with academia, work with international experts, and then get the best of ours and get them all in one room, and let's hammer it out. Let's work out problems and look at this in a very, very kind of open way. But I think it also requires the ability to make principled decisions versus populist decisions, and to stick to principles, again with the view to getting to this medium-term goal of really turning around the country. A transition to mass transit. I think this is maybe the most critical step for Sri Lanka's urban future. It has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, we're going to start to see the congestion being a drain on the economy. But if we do make it happen, I think it's going to be a game changer for the real estate markets, for the city, for the people, in every possible way. And I think it's like one of those things. It's kind of like seeing the ocean for the first time. Once you see it, you'll only realize how big an impact it possibly can have. But success of this is not really only about transportation. So, we have lots of debates about should it be a monorail, should it be electric, should it be bus rapid transit? Yeah, we can have that debate. But the fact is, you transport, the mass transit will not work unless we accompany that with very, very rigorous, very disciplined efforts on managing land use that goes with that mass transit. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think in unlocking the viability of mass transit introduction and getting the benefit to the country will depend on how well we manage the real estate linked to these transit corridors. And that's something that we're actually actively working on. So transport and planners and land use people, everybody needs to kind of work together, and of course, real estate developers as well. Transforming housing, again, I think fundamental. We need to do this. We have a bit of a glut in the high-end segment. We've got a massive program in the low-income segment that the UDA is running, which we're trying to optimize. The middle has somehow fallen through the cracks in the last, I'd say, 10 to 20 years, maybe even longer, which is why we're seeing this emptying out of the city and the moving of the middle class to the fringe. I think we need to arrest that, and we need to turn that around. So the government has a very aggressive program, a very ambitious program of building 500,000 middle-income houses. But let me clarify that a bit, because it doesn't mean that the government will build 500,000 houses. It means put incentives and systems in place so that the private sector can develop this 500,000 houses. What we're talking about, just to give you a little teaser on that, is we're looking not at developing the housing, but we're looking at an intervention in the land markets, again linked to transit as much as possible, where we can provide incentives to free up land to extract higher value from land, and these incentives will get published soon. And then we're looking at intervention in the housing finance market, because right now we have about 5% of our GDP in mortgage lending, which is dismally small. India is about 9%, UK is about 70%. We have a long way to go. So opening up the housing finance market, we think, is going to basically open up opportunity for developers to do their thing. So we look at enabling this from two ends and let the developers go in and do your thing. I think that's the way to do it. Low-income housing, we talked a little bit about it yesterday. We've got a massive program going, but our intention is to really modify this program to make it much more socially responsive, socially responsible, engaging with these communities, to kind of look at rehousing them as a transformation of their lives, of their livelihoods, rather than saying, look, they're an inconvenience because they're in a slum, let's put them in a box. Let's look at it differently and say, look, how do we get these people into the system? How do we make this generational shift? How do we make sure the next generation in these poor communities has access that you and I have had to great institutions and great places to do things? Fourth, enabling private investment. I think this is vital. We have to do it. We cannot have a future where the state builds everything and the state controls everything. And I think we in government need to truly internalize that. And I believe we are in that process. And I think we need to take a very, very constructive approach to engaging the private sector, because it is the private sector that can do this transformation, and it's private capital really that we need to figure out how to mobilize. But it's often misunderstood as well. People think of PPP saying, oh, we'll get the private sector to do it, not realizing or not acknowledging that the private sector has to make profit and has to get stuff done reasonably clearly. So I think it's going to require a lot of diligence and a lot of hard work and a lot of policy moves to make sure private capital can actually be mobilized. And that's where sometimes you might have to make decisions that are somewhat difficult to enable private capital to actually go. But we have to be a country that is known for being open for business, that people can come to and they know they can get stuff done fast, and they know that the government and the entire system around it is responsive, that wants them to succeed. We need to create that. And we also need to work on getting, especially in the real estate markets, moving from what we have now, which is quite speculative, except for some players, very speculative, to a more institutional real estate market. I think we need to be able to have institutional investors coming in, and to make them come in, to have them come in, we need to have a very fair, very clear, very level playing field, where professional, institutional players can actually come in and make money and make success. And finally, governance reforms. This is fundamental to everything, to making everything happen. And the one thing here I would like to emphasize is that we need to focus on strengthening our institutions. We need to invest in people, not just have more people, but have more quality people in all of our key institutions, and set up systems and processes. They're never sexy when you try to do these things, but once you put in systems and processes, then it does not matter who's really at top positions. It doesn't matter with these turnovers in politics, that the systems and processes are robust and rational enough that they sustain. Most advanced economies sustain growth because of this. We need to get there, and we need to work on our institutions. We also need to look at the incentives for people within government to actually perform. You have institutions, look, UDA manages 88 billion rupees of assets. You would cry if you know how much the people managing this money or this asset get paid. And if you're in the private sector, you would never dream of it. We need to get incentives right. It's the difference between, look, I've got a $10 billion investment or a 50,000 rupee house. The guy who's maybe processing these things gets paid the same thing if they clear both. Why bother? So we have to get incentives right. Take it seriously. And we also have to focus the mandates of our institutions so that really can sink their teeth in and do what they have to do. Also, as much as possible, I think we need to get to a process where we depoliticize some of the institutions and really get down to business. Keep your head down, do your thing, make the technically right decisions, the economically right decisions, and stick to them. And we need to create space for regulators to do that. So the question is, will we seize this moment? Clearly, Sri Lanka is at a transition point. I think we're at the cusp of what can be a dramatic turnaround of the Western province and a dramatic transformation of Sri Lanka. I really believe that, and that's what we will. That's the door that we're at right now. And if we play our cards right, we will see a fundamentally different Sri Lanka in the next 5 to 10 years, and a Sri Lanka that maybe you, me, my children, and maybe our grandchildren will be really proud to be part of. So the future of Sri Lanka depends on this moment. And if we seize this, and if we can all work together and go there, and not just depend on government to do it, but everybody come together and work together to make this transformation happen, I think we can do it. So I hope you join us. Thank you.
LBR LBO Infrastructure Summit 2015, making Colombo a globally competitive city.